Wild Hearts has been a fantastic surprise that I've been loving every minute of. It's a very different take on the hunting genre that actually gives some decent competition for Monster Hunter, and in some aspects, I actually prefer the way Wild Hearts approaches certain things compared to Monster Hunter. Things that I would actually love to see Capcom implement in their actual games in the future. That being said, Wild Hearts still has some pain points and things that I quite dislike about it, and things that I would like to see changed in the future, as they are actually detrimental to my enjoyment of the game. So with that being said, keep in mind that I very much love this game as I love Monster Hunter and want to see them both succeed, which is why I think it is important for me to make this video to give some feedback about the things that I dislike the most about Wild Hearts. Now, my first complaint about Wild Hearts is that there is less than one armor set per kimono, which wouldn't normally be a big deal, except for the fact that there isn't a very large number of them available currently in the game, and that many of them are essentially subspecies of different kimono. So once you finish the game, you'll realize that there isn't really all that much variety in endgame gear. Especially once you start taking into account the different skills of each armor set, and you see that only a very few select different armor pieces actually give you valuable skills that will increase your damage output. Most of the time you'll want to prioritize things such as Desperation, which will increase your damage output at the cost of some defense, or one other skill that increases your damage output when you only have one life remaining, which would normally not be a great thing. However, the endgame of Wild Hearts is about hunting the volatile kimono and the deeply volatile kimono, and you are only able to cart once against those kimono, so that skill is going to be active 100% of the time, which means that in most scenarios, that is going to be the best skill to use in the endgame. And speaking of endgame, I also have a bit of a problem with the endgame grind of Wild Hearts. Quite frankly, there isn't a lot to do in the endgame, as the only things that you can really chase after are talismans that you can farm for, and you don't really necessarily need to be in the endgame to farm for them, and then there's layered armors. There are no layered weapons, no weapon upgrades, augmentations, or anything to add on top of your already existing armor sets. It's only a cosmetic grind, again besides the talismans, which you can already farm before you get to the endgame. Now, I think that the requirements for farming these layered armor sets are a bit too much. You end up going from the mighty kimono, which don't have a lot of HP, to the volatile and deeply volatile kimono, which are essentially HP sponges. I would much rather have this gap between these two categories of kimono be much closer to the point where mighty kimono have a bit more HP to them, to where they don't die to a couple of hits from my Karakuri staff, and volatile kimono aren't on the other end of the spectrum, where they take like 5 or 10 times longer to hunt compared to the mighty kimono. Also, I'm not sure if this was done on purpose, but the fact that you only have a single card available to you against volatile kimono, what this has resulted in my case at least is that whenever I try to do these hunts in multiplayer, one of my teammates will eventually cart, and if one of them isn't patient and waits for a teammate to revive them, they will try to resurrect themselves, but because we only have one card available to us, the quest will instantly fail. So I think that at the very least, the developers should make it so that you don't have the option to resurrect yourself in those quests where you only have a single card, because if you try to do that, you're only going to fail the quest and nothing else. But again, I would like to see more things added to the endgame of Wild Hearts, more than just cosmetics to change the appearance of our armor sets. Of course, we're going to be getting free updates that are going to add different kimono to the game, and of course their corresponding armor sets, but I hope there is some sort of weapon augmentation system on top of your already existing weapons, or something else to add to the game, because as it currently stands, there isn't much of a reason to do any of the endgame hunts, because if you choose to simply do the mighty kimono, you'll be essentially farming the same materials if all you care about is upgrading your gear and you don't care about any of the cosmetic stuff. Now, one minor thing about Wild Hearts that I dislike, that I would like to see changed in the future, that kind of breaks the pace of some hunts, is that the Kemono will attempt to leave after a certain threshold of damage has been dealt to their HP. Contrast this with Monster Hunter, where most monsters will not instantly leave after taking some damage, they will usually have some time before they actually try to leave. So what ends up happening in Wild Hearts is that once you get to the endgame and you start having some pretty decent builds and your weapon deals a lot of damage, once you get close to the Kemono and the hunt begins, after just hitting the Kemono a couple of times, it will begin to flee and run away because you have simply dealt too much damage. In my opinion, that feels a bit clunky, and of course you could try to use the harpoon to stagger the Kemono and keep it from running away, but at that point it kinda feels like you're breaking the game. Which leads me to my next point, which is kind of how easy it is to break the game in Wild Hearts and how broken speedruns are in this game. In case you aren't aware, the timer for the hunts in Wild Hearts don't start counting down before the Kemono takes notice of you and roars and you see the actual Kemono title on screen. So what a lot of speedrunners do is actually try to stagger the Kemono as much as possible using the different Karakuri, and they will only attack the Kemono with their weapons only after they have used all of their Karakuri. And if you do this right, you're actually able to, once you finish your combo with your weapon, mount even more Karakuri before the Kemono is able to move and even perform a roar, which means that the timer has not yet begun to count down, but the Kemono is already way past being at half HP. So if right now you look up Wild Hearts speedruns on YouTube, you'll see that there are actually quite a few that have 0-second speedruns, which is absolutely absurd. And sure, speedruns aren't all that important. Personally, I'm someone that likes to improve themselves as a player, and even if I myself don't reset for hunts, I usually try to perform better on my hunts and compare my times with each different attempt. And well, with how broken this game is, I kind of feel discouraged from doing that. And sure, you could attempt to do these hunts without using any of your Karakuri, but at that point you are essentially restraining yourself from using the main mechanic of this game that distinguishes itself from Monster Hunter. The gameplay mechanic that actually makes this game stand out and be incredibly fun. So I hope that the Wild Hearts developers are able to somewhat address this without having to resort to nerfs or anything of the sort. Just maybe make it so that the timer starts counting down once you damage the Kemono for the first time. I do have one other minor gripe with this game, which is that I personally am not a big fan of the camera controls and the distance of the camera in this game. Being a very fast action game, I would much prefer to be able to zoom out the camera a little bit further and have a bigger distance between it and my hunter, because sometimes it feels a bit claustrophobic, and when you're using fusion Karakuri and when you're hunting some of these smaller Kemono, sometimes you're just not able to see a whole lot on screen. Especially when you're using weapons like the cannon or the Karakuri staff, which use a lot of particle effects. Sometimes it's very hard to see anything. And sure, sometimes the camera gets stuck in weird places, especially when you're using the claw blade, but I think that's something that you just accept as you play through the game, because it's a byproduct of how much freedom of movement the game offers you, and I think that, at least in my opinion, it's a worthy trade-off. Of course, I cannot finish this video without mentioning that I don't think the game has great graphics, but that doesn't really bother me too much. But what bothers me the most is that this game still has quite a few performance issues. I've heard that it had a lot of performance issues on PC. Personally, I played it on the PS5, but even then I experienced some slowdown that I didn't experience before I got to the 50-hour mark, which was a bit weird, but it's something that I don't like to see in my games, and it just felt weird to play the game with that slowdown. The game is also being sold at $70, which is very expensive, and I think that when you combine that with the performance issues, it ends up being a bit too much for most players, which I think is something that is reasonable to state. Of course, these issues will hopefully be fixed in the future, but it doesn't excuse the fact that the game launched with so many performance issues, and it's something that I think should be addressed in this video. Again, I love Wild Hearts, I think it's a phenomenal game, and I've been having a ton of fun with it, and I can see myself coming back to this game time and time again, especially with the free updates that we're going to be getting with this game. And can you imagine if they add more weapons to the game? Given how unique some of these weapons are, I can only speculate on how crazy the weapons are going to be in the future. If you guys have any ideas for any upcoming weapons, let us talk about that in the comment section. Also, I'm sure you can tell by my voice, but I'm a bit sick and under the weather. These past 2 videos were meant to come out 3 or 4 days ago, but I was stuck in bed for over 3 days, so apologies for that. Thank you very much for watching, my name is Dark Hero, and as always, happy hunting!